And with us now is a very special guest to our show, Sharon Randall. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a
Sharon
pleasure.
is a nationally syndicated columnist and author. I'm a big fan and big reader myself. And you come from the Carolinas, so tell us a little bit about your background.
I grew up in what's known as a family of liars. Because in the Blue Ridge Mountains where I grew up, storytellers were at one time they were called liars because their stories were not. I mean, they were more fabricated than factual, and yet at the same time they were still true of the human condition. So my family, they were all storytellers. My grandparents, everybody told stories. So I grew up with stories. Grew up sitting on the porch in the summers when it was too hot to be inside and you couldn't have the lights on because the bugs would carry you away. So you sat on the porch and you told stories. And they were always playing in the tapes in my mind. Everything was a story. And if you know Southerners, and Indianans are certainly Southerners in many respects, everything is a story. When you say you went to the grocery store, you don't just say, I went to the grocery store. You say, you know what? I went, and you start telling the story of what happened at the grocery store and the people you run into, and everything becomes a story. So that's the basis for my roots. I don't think of myself as a writer so much as a storyteller.
Even though you do not live in the South, do you still consider yourself a Southern girl?
I consider myself many. I belong to many regions. Yes, I'm still a Southerner because those are my roots, and it's where I grew up. It's my family and all of that. But when I came to California at 19 and got off the plane and looked around, I thought, I'm home. I liked it a lot. And what I liked about it was that freedom to be who you were. I didn't feel the need to be especially different myself because I was okay with who I was. But I liked the fact that other people could be who they were without having to conform to a certain stereotype or norm. And because it makes the world so much more interesting when you can have all these different kinds of people around you. And I thought that California was a place where people felt freer to be who they were then.
And California is where you became a writer.
It is.
Right? You went to school there?
No.
Where'd you go
I went to school at Gardner-Webb in North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
And when my scholarship was up, that's when I took off to California to visit an aunt and uncle for the summer. And the plan was I would finish college in California, but I kept doing other things, you know, like getting married and having babies and going to basketball games and washing towels and those kinds of things. I got my education, I like to say, the same place my mother got hers, from the School of Hard Knocks, although my hard knocks were not nearly as hard as hers were.
How did your career in journalism start?
I wanted to stay home with my children. That's what I wanted. I wanted to have children, and I got to do that. Boy, did I get to do that. And I stayed home with them until they were all in school. When my youngest started kindergarten, I took a part-time job in the library at the local newspaper, clipping and filing. Now, the newspaper libraries are called morgues, and they are not called that for nothing. They're very dirty, very dark places. But I loved it. I liked getting paid to be well read about the news, and I did that for a couple of years, and I kept suggesting story ideas to editors, and hey, why don't you, not for me, I didn't think of myself as a writer then, but I kept saying to them, well, why don't you do a story on this, or why don't you do a story on that? And they would tease me, well, why don't you do it, Randall? You know. So I finally did a couple of things freelance for them, and they liked them and wanted me to do more. And one summer, one of the feature writers was taking a leave of absence, and I finally got up the nerve to go in and ask to fill in, you know, stammering, stuttering. And my editor laughed, and she said, well, I've been waiting for you to ask.
Aww.
So that summer I worked full-time. My husband was home from school. He was a teacher and a basketball coach, and he was home with the kids for the summer, and I was working in the newsroom for the first time full-time. And my daughter, who was then 7, would call me, Mommy, you have to do something about Dad. It was great fun, great fun. But I wrote, they just threw me to the wolves that summer. They had me cover everything that came across the news desk, and I liked it. And I wrote some things that actually won some awards. And at the end of the summer, my editor called me back in, and she said, well, okay, you can't go back in the library. You have to come out and write now. And I said, that's great, but I still want to work part-time. And she said, we don't have any part-time writing jobs, Sharon. You don't know what an opportunity this is. It's all or nothing. And I said, I would love to do it, but it's not the right time. And she said, oh, all right, we'll let you write part-time. So I wrote part-time for a few years. Then they made me write a column, literally, made me do it. And the column was well received. It was picked up for syndication. And then they let me write at home and in my pajamas and that kind of thing. And I liked that a lot, too. And gave me the freedom to write about anything I wanted to write about. And I decided, as far as what I wanted to write about, there's a lot of political commentary being written and being written well. I didn't need to do that. Didn't have any desire to do it. It's not that I didn't have opinions. It's just that I didn't have a desire to do that. People do different things. What I wanted to write about, my grandmother always taught me never to be who you aren't, or to act, or to know what you don't know. Never pretend to be who you aren't or to know what you don't know. So I decided if I was going to write a column, I would write about everyday people and ordinary things, matters of the heart, love and loss and life and such, things that I was, things that I knew. And that was 17 years ago, and I've never run out of material.
That's wonderful. How many papers are you syndicated in today?
Well, the column is distributed to 400 papers around the country. That doesn't mean that they all use it. It means they have access to it, and many of them use it. I only know, the syndicate doesn't tell me this, I only know where I get mail from. And I get mail from lots of places and lots of wonderful people, and that's great fun. Lots of email now, too.
Now, your life turned upside down not too many years ago when your first husband died. And then what happened?
Well, my husband was diagnosed with colon cancer and was ill for 4 years. And it was not something I wanted to write about, but I was writing this personal column. And so you write about whatever comes along, and there it was. And some days I would think, I am not going to write about cancer again. I am sick of writing about cancer. Nobody wants to read about it. I'm not going to write about cancer. I'm going to write about something else. How about, okay, I'll write about dogs. And I'd sit down and I'd start writing about dogs. And pretty soon, the dogs would have cancer. I mean, it's just, if you truly write from your heart and from your experience, then you are going to write about what's going on. So I wrote about his struggles and the wonderful things that happened in those 4 years with his students and his basketball players and all the things he went through. And people responded tremendously to those things. I would hear from people all around the country who would write to say, people I would never even meet probably, and they would write to say that they were praying for us. Their children were praying for our children, which is just a lovely thing. He died in January of '98. A couple of years later, the same people who made me start writing a column made me do a book. And we did a collection of columns for Braths and Paper Cranes, which is reprinted for Magnum, which is really exciting. And I started flying around the country, signing books and that kind of thing. It was just an amazing thing. I never expected to do that. I think one of the best things about life is just to get up every morning and see what will happen next, because you never know.
Well, you've sure had some changes. You do not live in California now.
I do not. I lived in California for almost 35 years. And 3 years ago, after being a widow for 7 years, I made a very difficult choice to get married again. And a few months after we were married, when we got married, my new husband didn't say anything about moving. And then a few months into the marriage, he got this offer for a job in Las Vegas, of all places, as my mother would have called it. And he said, you know, I know you don't want to do this. We won't even look at it. And I said, I think we have to look at it. And we looked at it, and it was a great opportunity with a great newspaper. And I said, okay, let's try it. Let's find out what this new adventure is going to be. And so we moved 2 years ago, and now I'm a desert person. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina and spent the second half of my life on the coast of Northern California, and now I'm in the desert, the last place in the world I ever
That's
expected to
right.
be.
Well, your writing is still wonderful.
Thank
We
you.
want you to keep doing it, and I am so happy that you could come on our show today. Thank you
Aw.
so much. Sharon Randall has been our guest, and you'll see her face and words in your syndicated columns of your newspaper. So read Sharon Randall. She's delightful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.